You know,
We will.
we'll get through this. There's some promising things on the horizon, a lot of interesting medical things happening, and
Right.
one way or another, we'll be fine.
God
We just
willing.
have to have patience. In the modern world, we want everything now. It's like, but we've got vaccines for all these other things. Why don't we just gin one up?
Right.
It's not so simple. I'm gonna have to close my doors, so just don't go anywhere.
Okay.
This is the crazy world now, right? We're in our own Zoom rooms. So hold on one second. Okay, there we go. Okay, that was the smiley face. All right, here we are. Okay, is everybody ready? So when we left off in our last exciting episode, we had talked about the first two blessings of the Amidah. So the idea is this is our private audience with God. It's the Amidah sort of just to review. So the Amidah does two things. One is the public thing. It replaces the public sacrifice in the temple on behalf of all of Israel. And that's, in my mind anyway, that's really when the Shaliach Tzibur, the prayer leader, repeats the Amidah out loud, right? And that can only be done when you have a community. Hence, it's replacing the community offering. But in addition to that, it's supposed to be done silently by each individual prayer. And so each of us has an opportunity to have our own private audience with God. And if you imagine the Amidah replacing the temple worship, in that case, it's as if you were bringing your own sacrifice. So instead of bringing a sacrifice to the temple, we're bringing our Amidah prayer to God. So it does the individual as well as the communal. By the way, let me say one other thing about that. So there was an idea that when you have a minyan, if you don't have time to do a whole repetition of the entire Amidah. I mean, it takes 10 minutes or 8 minutes, whatever. So you don't have the 8 minutes to do the repetition of the whole Amidah. There was what they called the Heche Kedusha. So Heche comes from German and then Yiddish, and it means high or out loud. So the Kedusha that's done out loud. And what it is the prayer leader starts the Amidah with the first three blessings out loud through the Kedusha, so that the Kedusha is said out loud by the prayer leader. And then the congregation continues silently to the end of the Amidah. So there's no repetition of the Amidah, you're only doing it once, and the prayer leader is only doing out loud the first three blessings. And that's called the Heche Kedusha. So since it's German, obviously that's an Ashkenazic thing. I don't know that. I assume Sephardim do have the same custom, but I don't know what they call it. They wouldn't call it the Heche Kedusha. Call it something else. Um, Now, so you can all be in the know. So there's like a technical thing, which is, because Jews like to be technical. So if it's for the morning, so first of all, you don't do the Amidah out loud in the evening. So we're only talking about Shacharit, Mincha, and on Shabbat and festivals also Musaf, right? That's when you could do the Heche Kedusha. Now let's say you're doing it for Shacharit, the morning prayer. Then it's just the way I described it. The prayer leader does the first three blessings, and everybody continues through the end of the Amidah silently. But technically speaking, if it's Musaf or Mincha, the individual is not supposed to keep going straight from the Kedusha. You're supposed to start over again from the beginning of the Amidah. So you do privately your own first three blessings of the Amidah. Now you're probably the only five people who know this, but But that's technically what you're supposed to do. Now you're going to say, so what's the big deal? Why this difference between Shacharit and Musaf and Mincha? Why is it that only Shacharit you get to keep going, but Musaf Mincha you have to go back to the beginning and start over again? I'm glad you asked. So the answer is like a little idiosyncrasy about the service. So right at the morning service, what comes right before the Amidah is Micha Mocha, right? Micha Mocha B'Olim Adonai, and then at the closing blessing for that is Baruch Atah Adonai Gaal Yisrael, the Redeemer of Israel, because he right, isn't that it? Because he took us out of Egypt. And the rabbi said, you want to attach that that concept of God as Redeemer, to the Amidah, right? Because in the Amidah, you're going to talk about, God working wonders in the world also. And in the weekdays, particularly, it's an Amidah where you're asking God to do things. What's the basis for asking God to do anything? Well, we know God did stuff in the past, like taking us out of Egypt and rescuing us at the Red Sea. So you connect that to the Amidah. They said we don't want to have any interruption between those two. God forbid God should forget that he redeemed us before we start talking about new things. Right? We want to connect those two things together. And so in the morning, you just launch right into the Amidah, and that is your Amidah, and you're going to finish it. But in the Musaf and Mincha, Gaal Yisrael doesn't immediately come before the Amidah. So there's no reason to have to connect it to anything that came before. So now when the prayer leader does the Kedusha, you go back to the beginning and do your Amidah from the beginning, because it doesn't matter that you're not disconnecting it from something. That make sense? Anyway, that's the rationale for doing that. So much so that this gives rise to another custom which you might have noticed, which is when the prayer leader leads Shacharit and he gets to the final blessing of Gaal Yisrael, usually he kind of trails off, right? Baruch Atah Adonai, and he doesn't actually finish Gaal Yisrael. Do you ever notice that? Not all prayer leaders do that, but many do. So the reason they trail off at the end and they don't say Gaal Yisrael is because they're afraid that you're going to say Amen. And if you say Amen, now you made a break between Gaal Yisrael and the Amidah. so that nobody should make a mistake and say Amen and interrupt the concept, we're going to trail off and then, you finish the blessing. Okay, so anyway, now you know. And so even I know those rules, and I don't always follow those rules because I'm not, although I am a little bit compulsive, I'm not always that compulsive. But if you want to do it 100%, you're supposed to start over again for Musaf and Mincha. You go straight through at Shacharit. Okay, now we're done with that part. Let's talk about the Kedusha blessing. That's what I really wanted to talk about today. And then we'll talk about the last three blessings. So for the Kedusha, we have, oh my goodness, let's go here. Okay, so for the Kedusha, that is sort of the climax of the Amidah. We've introduced ourselves to God with the Avot. There, the Avot, right? We're first coming into God's courtroom. We're introducing ourselves to God. You remember you have this long history with our ancestors, and we're looking forward to having a relationship with you now. Then, again, like you might say to a king in a courtroom, wow, you are awesome and powerful, right? So how powerful is God? He is so powerful that he even can conquer death, right? He has the power of life over death. But he also heals the sick and frees the captives and keeps faith with those, etc. He does all these wonderful things. But those are the powers of God. So we enter the courtroom, we acknowledge who we are. As we come before God, we acknowledge God's awesome powers. And now we're hitting the climax of God's holiness. And everything after that in the Amidah, in my opinion, is really anticlimactic, right? The ultimate moment of closeness to God is the Kedusha. So here, I didn't really get this. For whatever reason, it wasn't covered in my liturgy class in school. So when I first heard the concept after I was a rabbi, I went, wow, that's really weird. Is that true? So I actually looked it up, and yes, it's true. Okay, here's what's true. The rabbis in the early couple of centuries believed that they could transform themselves to God's courtroom, that they could actually meditate or do some other kind of exercise that would transport them spiritually immediately into God's presence. Now, this is also a dangerous thing. You probably heard the story of the four who entered Pardes, the four who entered paradise. So that's what they were trying to do, apparently. They were engaging in some mystical practices to try and put themselves right into God's immediate presence. God's right before them, or they are right in front of God. Since it's a little weird to talk about God in spatial terms, because God's everywhere, what they're really saying is, let's say put it this way in modern terms. I've opened up a wormhole, and it's connected me. It's like plugged me into God's presence. God's everywhere, but like I've opened this wormhole to put myself immediately in God's presence. That's what they were doing.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
isn't that the whole point of Kabbalah?
Yes, exactly correct. Right. So this is the early Kabbalistic tradition, what they called the Hechalot literature. So one of the ways they thought they would do this is they would look at the two prophets in the Bible who seem to have that experience themselves. And those two prophets are Isaiah and Ezekiel. Both of them have this experience at the beginning of their being sort of invested with this mantle of prophecy. As they're called upon for the first time by God to become a prophet, they have this vision of being in God's immediate presence. And then they describe what that is. So in Isaiah, it actually doesn't happen in chapter 1 for some reason. You'd think it would be chapter 1, but it's not. It's chapter 6 of Isaiah. And I think it's chapter 1. It is chapter 1 and 3 of Ezekiel. And they both have a vision of, and I'll talk about this in a minute, God sitting on a throne or a chariot, and it's being transported by angels. And it's worth looking. I didn't copy the section. I mean, I have some of the sections copied, but you go back and read the whole chapter, just to see what that experience is like. They each describe the angels in some detail. Ezekiel in particular, and Ezekiel's vision is really weird, right? So he imagines that these angels have 4 heads. And one head is facing in each of the 4 directions. And the idea is that this angel doesn't need to turn its head to see where it's going, because it has a face on all 4 sides. So any direction it's going, it has a face that can see forward, right? But the 4 heads are like the weirdest. I don't know how this works. It's an eagle head, a lion's head, an ox's head, and a human head, right? And I'm just trying to imagine to myself what it looks like to have an eagle head. Eagles have very small heads. They're not big creatures. So you have an eagle head on one side and this enormous ox head on the other side. How does that even work? I don't even know what that looks like. But this is what he imagined. So some people say, and we were just having a conversation about this, I guess, in the museum for Shabbat dinner or something. Some people say, he was just on some mushrooms or something, like he was, who knows what he was smoking. Maybe he had some kind of hallucinatory experience. There is another way to think about it, and this is the way I prefer to think about it, and that is that, as with all these prophetic visions, they're metaphors. So I would like to think he didn't actually see God as an old man sitting on a throne, because I don't think that's what God looks like. I don't think God looks like anything. And he didn't actually see angels with 4 heads, because I can't imagine what that would be. What he's trying to say is that these creatures that are sort of the forces of God, God's manifestation. What are angels? Let's talk about that for a second. Angels are messengers. The word malach is the Hebrew word for angel. And a malach is like a messenger, okay? So it's how God, who is standing outside of, I'm going to use modern language, God who is outside of the space-time continuum. How does God enter the space-time continuum? Well, he has a conduit, an angel that connects him, okay? So that's what kind of angels do. They connect God, who is outside the space-time continuum, into this world here, however you understand that. So these conduits for God, now, metaphorically speaking, have four powers, four separate maybe even clusters of powers, right? So what is an ox? The ox is one of the strongest animals in the ancient world. So it represents brute force, power, right? What is the lion? The lion is the king of the jungle, right? The eagle, um, so the eagle could either be protecting its young, and that is the sense in which one of the prophets says God will carry you up like on eagle's wings, right? God is going to protect you and nurture you. Eagles also can fly, right? The other like a bird's fly. That's an amazing power. They can, and also they can see things from the bigger perspective, right? Like we would say today, from the 10,000 foot perspective. You know, when you look down on the world and you see it from that perspective, it's a different perspective. So eagles have a different perspective on the world because they can fly above it than we do down here. Or eagles have eagle eyes, we say. So maybe the vision, they can see. All these different things may be encompassed in this particular aspect of the angel. And of course, the human face represents wisdom and knowledge and all the special things that human beings have. So these angels are not freakish looking creatures. They're really conduits that represent these different abilities of God entering into the world. That's another way to understand that image. So Ezekiel has this image. Isaiah has this image. The angels are fluttering around God's presence. That's important. And by the way, in Isaiah's vision, the angels are saying something. What do they say? Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melo Kol Haaretz Kvodo, right? So while they're fluttering around God's presence, they say, Holy, holy, holy is God of armies. Adonai Tzvaot, Tzeva is the army. So God of armies, armies of what? Angelic creatures, right? Adonai Tzvaot, Melo Kol Haaretz Kvodo. His glory fills the universe. Right? That's what they're saying. So, as you know, when we do the Kedusha blessing, we're bouncing on our heels when we say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And so why do we bounce on our heels when we do Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh? Because the idea of the Kedusha is we are imagining that we ourselves are part of God's angelic army. We're transported into God's presence. We're surrounded by the angels, and we're part of that army of angels up in the heavens. And so, as we say the words the angels are saying, Kadosh, 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 we bounce on our heels to act like we're fluttering around God's throne room, like the angels are fluttering.
No.
Yeah. So that's why we're bouncing. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Now, there's another thing that I do and some people do. I'm not sure that this is, I have to check and see if this was actually written up in the legal codes, but right before you do Kadosh, 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 it says, Vikara ze el ze v'yamar. So Vikara, kara is to call, likro is to call. Vikara ze el ze. Ze means this, and el means to. So Vikara ze. So this one calls el ze, to that one. Right? This one calls to that one, va'amar, and says, right? So the one angel calls to the other angel and says, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. So when we do kara ze el ze, I actually turn to my right, vikara ze el ze, v'amar, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. So again, the reason we do this is to reenact what the angels are doing. They're calling to each other. We are all the angels. So I'm turning to my right, my angel on the right, whoever is standing next to me, and my angel on the left, whoever is standing next to me on that side. And we are calling to each other and we're saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, right? So we're imitating this angelic chorus that the prophets imagine are surrounding God. Two other things that come out of this also, in Ezekiel's vision, he says that each of the angels had two legs, but their two legs were fused together as if they were only one leg. So again, technically speaking, and I don't always do this, but usually I do, technically speaking, you also are supposed to fuse your legs together, right? Put your feet together tightly so that you are imitating, again, these angels that have only one foot, so to speak, when you're doing this. Okay, and then, of course, in Ezekiel's vision, the angels don't say that. The angels probably don't actually say anything. Let me see if I can get you the text of the here, let's take a look over here. Let's go to the Kedusha. Okay. So here's the Kedusha page from Seder Lev Shalem, and you can see where the little mouse hand is, the little scroll thing there. Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimkomo, right? So the way we now translate this passage, in Ezekiel's vision, they're saying Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimkomo, which is blessed is glory, the glory of God from its place, or from his place. Praise be Adonai's glory wherever God dwells, right? That's how they translate it here. I don't have the full text of the Ezekiel. Whoops. Can you see this? Are you seeing the picture?
No.
Oh, yeah, so I didn't do it right. Sorry. Let's try this again. How about that?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I forgot to do. Okay, so there it is. Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo. Praised is Adonai's glory wherever God dwells. The problem is, if you go back to if you get a modern translation, or I believe in the Jewish Study Bible, the Oxford Jewish Study Bible, which has a modern translation and commentary. Now scholars are saying this is probably a typo. Typos happened in the ancient world. Of course, they didn't have typewriters, so we call them scribal errors because they were handwritten by scribes. So the scribe made a mistake in copying. And this word here, Baruch, according to modern Bible scholars, probably wasn't supposed to be Baruch. It was supposed to be Barum, the final mem instead of a final chaf. And therefore it meant he heard this great noise. He says he hears this great noise, and then it says Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo. But instead of that, he hears this great noise. Barum would be in the going up of God's presence from its place. Barum means to go up, right? So as God lifted God's presence up from the place, he heard this great whooshing sound.
Rabbi, I have a quick question.
Sure.
I don't have my picture on. You don't want to look at me.
Yes.
So in English, it's praised is Adonai's glory whenever God dwells. The alternate translation that you just, or the correcting the scribal error,
Yeah.
makes a lot more sense to me because it seems to me praised is Adonai's glory wherever God dwells is very redundant.
Yeah.
Am I reading with the definition of Adonai is just a word that we
It's God's name.
God's name.
Right, correct. Yes, so it is, yes. And it does work better to say, he heard a great noise when God's presence was lifted up, right? That does make a lot more sense. And I think they actually have a manuscript that has it with the final mem, which is the basis for why they say that somebody copied it wrong, and then that became the standard text. In any case, by the time this prayer was formulated, and probably by the time the rabbis were doing this mystical tradition, they had already assumed that the angels actually said Baruch Kavod Anamim Kamo, and the prayer really works better assuming that there's something the angels are that is whatever something the angels are saying, because that is the idea. So any case, let's go back to one more second about what the rabbis thought they were doing, and then we'll talk about the kedusha. So they meditated on these two passages, particularly the one in Ezekiel, the one that's really strange, probably because it was so strange. They assumed it had secret wisdom, secret knowledge, that if they studied it long enough, they could figure out what's really going on. And as soon as they could do that, that sort of unlocks the key to get to the wormhole, to get into God's presence, right? And so that was why it was called Hechalot literature, that they were going to use Ezekiel's vision to go through the wormhole to come into God's presence. Now, the story about the four who went to the Pardes, so this is a dangerous thing, right? Four rabbis were doing this mystical practice. One of them died on the spot. One of them went insane. One of them left Judaism, went crazy and left Judaism, and the only Rabbi Akiva came out whole. So here's where I guess we're all of an age where we've seen Star Trek. Yes, anybody else a Star Trek? The original Star Trek, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. Okay, so if you remember the episode, I love being able to do this with people who know what I'm talking about. If you remember the episode where the ambassador, right, was this box that they bring on board the Enterprise, and this blind woman could have this relationship with the ambassador because she was blind. If you were not blind, when the box opened and you looked inside the box and saw the ambassador itself, you would go insane, you'd go crazy, or you'd die, it would kill you. And only Mr. Spock, and only if he was wearing special sunglasses, right, could gaze upon this ambassador when the box was open and not go crazy. And then, of course, in the episode, one time he forgets to put on his sunglasses and he does go crazy, etc., whatever. Okay, so why do I tell you that story? Because that's the experience that these rabbis had when they came in contact with God. What was it that was so freaky about seeing the ambassador? It was like you were suddenly overwhelmed with ultimate truth, and human beings can't handle the ultimate truth, so it drives them insane, right? And that was the experience the rabbis had in entering the Pardes. They're coming in contact with the source of everything in the universe, and this overwhelming wisdom and truth and knowledge, or whatever, literally blew their minds. It's dangerous. And so one guy just freaks out so much, he has a heart attack or whatever and dies. One guy just can't process it all and goes insane. One guy, I guess, just rejects it, just pushes it away and I can't do this anymore, I'm leaving, goodbye, right? And so he goes off on his own, and the only one person is able to come out with right? So it's a dangerous process. So, but nevertheless, a spiritually overwhelming and enriching process. And although the rabbis thought it was dangerous, they wanted to give us normal people an opportunity to have that experience in a safe way. So here I'm going to use another metaphor. It's like turning your computer on in safe mode, right? I don't know if you've done this before, but if you've screwed up your computer and it seems that every time you boot up, it does this virus or it does something else that takes over the computer and you can't get anywhere. One way you might be able to fix it is if you press a certain function key, which I don't remember anymore, it turns on safe mode. And that turns off all kinds of other stuff that might screw up the computer, so you can get inside and you can noodle around and try and fix it, right? You're open your computer in safe mode. It prevents dangerous programs from from messing up the computer while you try to fix it. Safe mode. That's what the Kedusha is supposed to be. The Kedusha is supposed to be a way to encounter God in safe mode. Okay? And so what they did, they took those verses from Isaiah and Ezekiel that they used to do their unsafe mode, but compacted them into this prayer that allows us to have a sort of knockoff experience like that. Okay, so let me go back to sharing the screen, and with that in mind, let's see how it works. Okay, so Nikadesh Shimcha Ba'olam, we will hallow your name in this world. Kashem Shemakdishimo Tov B'Shmei Marom, just like Kashem means as name, but it means just like Shemakdishim, that they make holy. Oto, it make it holy. Bishmei Marom, that's Shemayim. I don't know if you remember the trick I told you before. You take the final mem off and lengthen the vowel before it, and it makes it, and you can connect it to another noun. Marom, remember Barum Adonai? Remember when I told you it was not Baruch, but Barum, to go up? Marom means up there, right? Same root. Marom, up there. And Shemay is Shemayim, in the heavens above. Right? So just like they make his name holy in the heavens above, we're going to make his name holy here on earth. Kakatuv al yad neviecha, just like it's written by the hand of your prophet. Vikara ze el ze, just like I said, one calls to the other. Va'amar, and says, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech Haaretz Kavodo. So we're going to be the angels up in the heavens announcing God's holiness. Az B'Kol Rash. Now this is getting back to Ezekiel's vision where he heard a loud noise. So with a loud noise, a great loud noise, right? Gadol, a big loud noise. Adir v'chazak, really strong. Mashmi'im kol, they make the voice sound heard. Mitnasim leumat seraphim. Seraphim are kind of angels that are fiery angels. Lisrof is to burn. So seraphim are fiery angels. There are different kinds of angels. These ones are fiery angels. And this is what they bless him, saying, Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. They say, blessed is God's presence from his place. Okay, then, mimkomcha malkeinu tofia. So let's look at the translation. Our sovereign, manifest yourself from wherever you dwell. V'timloch aleinu, and rule over us. Ki mechakim anachnu lach, because we're waiting for you. Okay. Here is yet another place where the rabbis took a blessing about, I'm going to go through the wormhole, I'm going to be in close contact with God. And even then, they can't help but say, but you know what? We want Mashiach now. We want the Messiah. Make the Messiah appear in the world so we can go back to Jerusalem, rebuild our country. I mean, this is so much on their mind. It's on their mind even when they're having this intimate connection with God. That's what they mean when they say, Ki mechakim anachnu lach, we're waiting for you. Matai timloch b'Tzion, when will you rule in Zion again? When are you going to return your presence to Zion, rebuild the temple? I mean, it's right here in the middle of this holiest of prayers. B'karov yameinu, may it be soon in our days. Le'olam va'ed tishkon, and forever you should be established. How do they say that? Let it soon be in our day and throughout all time. Tit gadal v'tit gadash, may it be made great and holy. B'toch Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, your city. L'dor v'dor l'netzach netzachim, from generation to generation and forever and ever. Ve'einenu tirenena, and may our eyes see. Malchutecha, your kingdom, right? We want Messiah to come. Kedavar ha'amur b'shirei uzechel, just the way it was spoken about in the songs of your strength. Who is that? Your city, from one generation to another, forever and ever. May our eyes behold your dominion as described in the songs of praise offered to you by David. Al Yedei David, by David. Mashiach Tzidkecha, your righteous Messiah. And so David was thought to have written the book of Psalms, And so now comes a quote from, quote, David, right? In other words, a quote from the book of Psalms. Yimloch Adonai le'olam, God will reign forever. Elohai Tzion, your God, O Zion, Lador Vador, from generation to generation. Hallelujah. Right? So this is Psalm 146. It's the last verse of Psalm 146. So they stuck it right in here in the Kedusha prayer. We want Messiah now. Lador Vador, Nagid Galecha, forever, from generation to generation, we will recount your glory, your greatness. Lenetzach Netzachim, and forever and ever, Kedushat Chan Nakdish, we will make your name holy. Sanctify your words of holiness. Your praise will never cease from our lips, for you are God and sovereign, great and holy. Baruch Atah Adonai, the holy God. You are the holy God. Okay, so that's the Kedusha. This is our opportunity, the climax of the Amidah. We've gone through the wormhole. We're in God's presence immediately, and we're up there praying with the angels. And even at that great moment, we're saying, but we want you to manifest this exciting, ecstatic experience in the real world. We don't want to have to just do it in this momentary, safe mode version. Come back, and let's do it for real in the real world. That's the purpose of the Kedusha. Now I want to go to my talk, my take on it. So what's my modern take on this? So first of all, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but the opening three blessings of the Amidah were early on considered to be represented by the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, so let me just go back to Avot. So Avot, right, mentions all three of them. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob, mentions all three. But how does it end? Magen Abraham, the shield of Abraham. So they said, well, the Avot then is the blessing for Abraham, because it talks about the shield of Abraham. Gevurot is about Isaac. Why? Because it says Mechayim Etim, he brings life to the dead. Isaac was almost sacrificed by his father Abraham, and God rescued him. So he was almost dead, and God brought him back to life, so to speak. There's even a midrash, this is wacky, okay? But there's even a midrash that Isaac died. Not because Abraham killed him. Abraham didn't actually sacrifice him, but that Isaac saw the knife over his head and his soul left the body. He just died of fright, so to speak. That's the midrash. And then God calls to Abraham, don't do it, and God restores Isaac back to life. He actually restores Isaac back to life. So based on that midrash, which is bizarre, again, this Gevurot prayer, which talks about God bringing life to the dead, is really Isaac's blessing. And now we get to the Kedusha, and that's considered Jacob's blessing. Why? Because who was it who saw God up in the heavens? Right? Abraham was visited by three strangers. Abraham seemed to talk to God, but it doesn't say Abraham went up to the heavens and saw God. And it didn't say that about Isaac. But Jacob, when he left home, he ran away from home that first night, right? He had that vision of the stairway to heaven with the angels going up and down, and he saw God standing at the top of the stairway. So that ascent to heaven is sort of Jacob. So the Kedusha was considered Jacob's blessing. Okay, so it's like Jacob's ladder or the wormhole. We can think of Jacob, maybe it's Jacob's wormhole. I like this now. I'm going to use this from now on. Jacob's wormhole. Okay, so this is not God in history or in nature as in power, but God in God's essence. You're getting the essence of God'sness. It's incomprehensible by humans yet experienced. Note the brevity of the prayer, because what else can you say about God's essence? The original one, the one that's not done by the prayer leader, is just a very short blessing. God is holy and that's it. Right? What else can you say? The repetition of the Kedusha has these, based on these three verses. Merkava mystics, they were called Merkava mystics because Merkava means chariot, right? So they would meditate on Ezekiel's chariot and get to God. And they used these verses to induce an ecstatic intimacy with God, and inserted this so that we can have a knockoff mystical experience. The prayer book is for the masses, and therefore mysticism, which is dangerous if not done properly, was left out. This prayer comes the closest to that aspect of Judaism. And here I give the reference from a scholar. I didn't invent this. It's actually somebody who did a very scholarly study of Jewish prayer, and that's what he said. And other scholars since have agreed with him. This was beginning of 20th century. God is the source of holiness, but we are also commanded to be holy like God. This was this last week's Torah portion. Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani. We're supposed to be holy because God is holy. So we're knockoff versions of God. And we attempt to imitate God's moral and ethical qualities. So here's Isaiah's vision, right? He sees God's throne room with the 6 wings. They're fluttering around. They say, holy, holy, holy. And that's why we bounce on our heels. Here's Ezekiel's vision. The angels have 4 faces, etc. Somebody suggested Friday night that these images don't have to be characteristics of the animals. They may represent different empires. That certainly happens in the book of Daniel. Daniel represents the empires as different animals or different aspects of a statue. That's possible. I hadn't thought about it. Another way to think about it, perhaps. The 2 legs are fused together. Okay. And then you get this psalm. But if you look at this psalm in its context, here's Psalm 146 in its context. And you'll remember that we talked about how it says, God keeps faith forever, brings justice to the oppressed, gives food to the hungry, frees those who are bound, gives sight to the blind, raises those who are bound down, and loves the just, protects the stranger, supports the orphans and widows, frustrates the design of the wicked. And that's the one that ends. We want to see that here in this world. May God reign throughout all generations forever and ever, because we like this to happen, right? Okay, so my modern take on this is, as I've said before, we are God's hands and feet, making those things happen in the world. God can't, in my opinion, interfere with the laws of nature. If God interferes with the laws of nature, they're not laws anymore. And science goes out the window. We can't understand the world around us. We rely on things to be constant, the laws of physics and so on. And God created that world. And 99% of the time, that world provides a paradise. The Earth is really an amazing planet that functions so brilliantly, 99% of the time. Then you have coronaviruses or tsunamis or earthquakes or floods, and that causes problems because of the same laws of physics. And that's why God created us, right? To be his hands and feet, to help alleviate the suffering, to prevent suffering when we can, to offer comfort to those, to help people who are struggling. We're supposed to make those kinds of miracles happen in the world. So this is my modern take on it. That whole litany of things that God does in Psalm 146, he's acting through human beings to make that happen. And that's not so different than the Bible, my argument, right? Of course, the Bible talks about miracles too, but almost all the time in the Bible, God doesn't do these things alone. He enlists a human agent. Even in the Exodus from Egypt, right? God could have just spoken to Pharaoh directly and said, let my people go, but he didn't. He enlisted a human being, Moses, to go talk to Pharaoh. Why? It seemed like it would be much more effective if God just used his booming voice to tell the Pharaoh what to do. Why wouldn't that have worked? For whatever reason, even in the Bible, it seems to be that human beings are God's agents. And I think in our world, that is at least 99% of the time. Maybe there are some miracles, some minor miracles, but almost all the time things happen because we human beings are inspired to do something amazing, right? Where did we get the inspiration to do that? I really believe that comes from God. So if you want to see the freeing of the captives, the healing of the sick, the justice for all, the compassion for the poor, widows, and orphans, that's us. We're responsible for that. Don't blame God. He's told us he's commanded us to do those things in the Bible itself. So here's my take on Kedusha. I'm going to go through the wormhole. I'm going to come in close contact with God. It's going to be like an electrifying experience for me. And now, just like it then says, we want to see God dwelling in the world, in the real world. How do we make that happen? Because when we come back from that ecstatic experience, we are more enthused and charged and energized to do those things in the world that will make God's presence felt here, by healing the sick, freeing the captives, helping the widows and orphans. That's how we do it, right? So I'm going to go have my ecstatic experience and bring it back down and go out into the world and do God's work. I don't do this every time, sad to say. I mean, sometimes I'm just praying by rote like everybody else. When I'm focused, when I'm paying attention, that's what happens, right? And I think that's the purpose of the Kedusha. And so it's not just about having an ecstatic, personal, spiritual high. It's about using that energy to promote goodness in the world. Okay, so that's the first three blessings of the Amidah. Like I said, the rest is kind of anticlimactic, but let's get to the end. Some people say, oops, wait a minute, I didn't do it right. Sorry, I have to put up the share screen. Okay, where's share screen? Oh no, I lost it. Oh, come on. Wait, share screen. God, how did I lose that? Okay, there. Okay, you can see it now, yeah?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So some people, when they talk about the Amidah, they say the opening three blessings. This is going to sound crude. The opening three blessings are buttering God up. Sort of like God is some kind of egomaniac ruler. I won't make any political statements. That needs to be flattered to death before he'll do anything, right? So it's like, hey, God, you had this great relationship with our ancestors. Remember how wonderful life was? Oh, you're so powerful. You're so powerful. Hey, you're holy, holy, holy. Now let me ask you for some things, right? So the first three blessings are trying to butter God up and tell God how great God is, because now we're going to ask for some stuff. And then the last three blessings are thank you, thank you, thank you, goodbye. I think that's, first of all, kind of a crude way to think about it. So I like the way I explained the opening three blessings. But now if you look at the last three blessings, it's also new. The last three blessings are not thank you, thank you, thank you, goodbye. In fact, two of them are two more requests. Only one of them is thank you. So let's take a look at what they are. The first of the last three blessings is Ratzei Adonai Eloheinu v'Amcha Yisrael u'v'tfilatam. Take a look at what it says in the English over here. Well, okay, it's kind of poetically translated. Adonai, our God, embrace your people Israel and their prayer, right? It would be actually accept. Let's say is to be pleased by, I guess. Embrace, whatever. May you embrace your people Israel and their prayers. Restore worship to your sanctuary. Again, we're sticking in this idea that we want to have the rebuilding of Jerusalem. May the prayers of the people Israel be lovingly accepted by you, and may our service always be pleasing. And then during special days, we do an insertion there. May our eyes behold your compassionate return to Zion. We stick that in again. And then finally, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you who restores your divine presence to Zion. It's a prayer asking for God to return to Zion and to accept our prayers. It's not a thank you at all. That's not a thank you. What is it doing here? The reason it's here is because, going back to what we did a couple sessions ago, we looked at the Mishnah and how the temple ritual was done. After the priest did the sacrifice, he did a Ritzeh prayer. May God accept my sacrifice in the sincerity in which it was offered. May it be accepted for the purpose in which it was offered. And that's what it says in the Mishnah, what the priest did when there was a sacrifice offered. The Amidah is replacing the sacrifice in the temple. So after you do the sacrifice, after you do the Amidah, you have to do a Ritzeh prayer. May God accept our prayers. And that's exactly what this is. May God accept the prayers, the worship of your people. But since we now, but having said that, immediately after having said that, we recognize, or we're aware of, the fact that we can't really do what we want to do, which is to pray in Jerusalem at the temple. So God, while we are asking you to accept our prayers, we also want you to fix that so we can go back to Jerusalem and pray the way we're supposed to in the temple in Jerusalem. So that's what the Ritzeh prayer is doing here. Let me add one more political statement here before I go on. This is kind of complicated, but many in the Orthodox world, I'm sure not all in the Orthodox world, but many in the Orthodox world believe that when the Messiah comes, we're going to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and there's a bunch of people there who are getting ready to do sacrifices again. And they can't wait to sacrifice animals on an altar in Jerusalem. And I would imagine the rest of the Jewish world, which is a vast majority of the Jewish world, is kind of not so crazy about that idea. Why would we want to go back to sacrificing animals? Nobody does that anymore. It's a bloody mess. Why do we have to bring animals into this? God doesn't need the sacrifices. So why should we why are we doing this? That's the way people worship their gods 2,000 years ago, but nobody does that now. There's no reason to do that anymore. So my modern view is that if we rebuild the temple, we'll be doing modern prayer, maybe even just an Amidah still, but it'll be at a central international focal point for all of Jews. And maybe there'll be webcams, and we'll be doing like we're doing now, distance learning, except, they'll be beaming out from Jerusalem this constant set of prayers, or what, a national prayers on behalf of all the Jewish people. That's my view. I imagine the Orthodox people who want to have sacrifices will be unhappy with that. So the only thing I can say about that is when the Messiah comes, he'll let us know how it's supposed to be done, and I imagine we'll all figure it out. And until the Messiah comes, we don't have to address that. And maybe that's a good reason for waiting till the Messiah comes until we have to deal with it, because it's going to be very contentious to figure out what we're going to do there. And if somebody can establish that they really are the Messiah and they have the authority to speak, I guess we'll all pay attention. Needless to say, I don't think that's happening anytime soon, and maybe that's not a bad thing. The other question, though, what?
Can I ask just a couple of questions about that?
Sure.
So I have trouble differentiating within the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox community, I don't know, the lines between different beliefs. Like,
yeah, well, who believes what?
Yeah, I don't think that anybody in the modern Orthodox movement wants to restart sacrifices. But
yeah,
I don't think. What about? Let me just ask: do the Lubavitcher think that? Do the Satmar that got gathered together for those funerals think that? Who is it exactly? What movement
You know,
actually
I
wants?
don't know. I haven't asked because mostly because I don't want to get into an argument with somebody about something like that. But it'd be interesting to look into that and ask some people. Maybe
Okay.
someday I'll just do a survey of some people and see what they think. Um,
I have a feeling it's really, really extreme thought, though.
yeah,
That would be my guess. Extreme in Israel, for example,
yeah.
maybe in Brooklyn Heights, but I
You
don't
know,
think most Jews want to do that.
yeah. So this romanticizing the past. I mean, it was definitely a bloody mess for one thing, right? You're sacrificing hundreds of animals, and they had a whole water system to keep the place clean and everything. But it just the whole idea just sounds completely crazy to me.
All right, I didn't mean to put you on a spot there. Thank you very much.
Having said that, there is a second big problem, of course, with having a temple in Jerusalem, and that is that the Dome of the Rock is sitting up there. And politically speaking, how are we supposed to deal with that? So, two things about that. First of all, again, if the Messiah comes and is able to prove the Messiah is the Messiah, maybe we'll get everybody to agree on something. Maybe. Um, but you know, I heard or I read a couple of years ago from one of the chief rabbis of Israel, no less. I'm an authority from one of the chief rabbis of Israel at the time, wrote something which really knocked me off my chair. He said, look, if we're rebuilding the temple, this is what he said, it doesn't have to be exactly at the spot where the other temple was, which most people assume is where the Dome of the Rock is sitting right now. In other words, we'd have to blow up the Dome of the Rock in order to build the temple. But he said, Chief Rabbi of Israel, doesn't have to be exactly where it was before. It's a big space up there. We could put it next door. He said that. So imagine a world in which we're all at peace and harmony and we all agree to love each other and respect each other. Imagine that world. What would be wrong with having the shrine for the Muslims here, the shrine for the Jews over here, and then down the street is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for Christians? And we're all praying in Jerusalem, all three Abrahamic faiths. And then Isaiah's vision about all peoples will go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the mountain of the house of the Lord, and will bless God, will actually happen. Anyway, that being said,
Baruch Hashem.
yeah, all right. So that being said, that's how I would interpret Ritzei Adonai. It's going back to the prayer, right? Which is, may God accept our prayers, and may we eventually be able to do it in an international venue. That would require, of course, all Jews to agree on how that's going to be done, which in itself would be a miracle. But okay, let's set that aside for now, and we can at least do the first part of the blessing, which is may God accept our prayers. That certainly is something that we, at the end of the Amidah, it's like, okay, I hope this prayer was acceptable to you. I tried to be paying attention as I was praying, and I tried to offer it in a sincere way. Please accept my prayers. Not a thank you. The next one is a thank you. Modim anachulach. It absolutely is a thank you. It's the quintessential thank you. Thank you, God. And I love this prayer. I'm glad they translated it this way. We thank you. They used to translate it, we recognize you, or something silly like that. No, it is we thank you. Modim lahodot can mean two things. It can mean to give thanks, or it can mean to acknowledge. But clearly in this context, it doesn't mean to acknowledge. It means to thank. We thank you for you are ever our God and the God of our ancestors, the bedrock of our lives, the shield that protects in every generation. We thank you and sing your praises for our lives that are in your hands. I mean, this is so beautiful, and particularly now when we're all dealing with the coronavirus. We're thanking God for the lives that are in our hands, for our souls that are under your care, and for the miracles which we often forget in the day-to-day things that we do, but the miracles that accompany us every single day, for your wonders and your gifts that are with us each moment, evening, morning, and noon. Every minute is another miracle. You are the one who is good, whose mercy is never ending, the one who is compassionate, your love is unceasing. We have always placed your hope in you. For all these blessings, may your name be praised and exalted, our sovereign, always and forever. May all that lives thank you always and faithfully praise your name forever, God of our deliverance and help. Baruch atah Adonai, your goodness. Your name is goodness, and praise of you is fitting. That is the quintessential Jewish thank you, and that is, in fact, one of the last three blessings. But now, the next one's not another thank you. It's a prayer for peace. Sim Shalom, or Shalom Rav in the evening, is a prayer for peace. Grant peace in the world, goodness and blessing, grace and blah, blah, blah. You have been given us as a guide to life, the love of kindness, righteousness, blessing, and compassion, life, and peace. May it please you to bless your people Israel at every moment and at all seasons with your gift of peace. Baruch atah Adonai, who blesses your people Israel with peace. Peace, peace, peace. Not a thank you, it's a prayer for peace. Why is this? After we said thank you, I like to say it's kind of like Columbo, you know? For those of you who remember Columbo. So, you know, he would question somebody, right? And it was sort of this innocent kind of a thing. Of course, he was really smart and was trying to trick them. And then he'd start to leave. And then just as he got to the door, he'd turn around and say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I got one more question for you." You know, it was always the zinger, right? "Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing I had to ask you." You know, so this is like what we're doing with God. It's like, yeah, please accept our prayers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, I forgot. Can we also have some peace? One last thing I forgot to ask about. How about some peace? Right? It's like Columbo. Okay, why are we asking for God for peace after we already said thank you? We should be just saying goodbye, right? So the answer is, again, if you go back to that Mishnah about how the temple ritual functioned, the priest would do the sacrifice, then he would do Ritzeh, may God accept our prayers or our sacrifices, and then he did the priestly blessing. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, may the Lord bless you and watch over you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'kanecha, may God's light shine upon you and be gracious to you. And then Yisa Adonai panav elecha, may God's face always shine upon you. V'yasem lecha shalom, and grant you peace. The very last word of the priestly blessing is peace, shalom. And from that, the rabbis understood that whenever we mere mortals construct a prayer sequence, the last thing we do in that prayer sequence should be a prayer for peace, because that's the way God set up the priestly blessing to be. The last thing is peace. And so after we say thank you, thank you, thank you, we do a prayer for peace. And in fact, if you go back to the Amidah, you'll see that in the morning, not in the evening when it's not repeated by the prayer leader, but whenever there's a prayer leader doing a repetition of the Amidah, the prayer for peace is introduced by the priestly blessing. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, and the congregation responds, Ken yehi ratzon. Right? That's the clue that the reason that this prayer for peace here was because of the priestly blessing, which was the last thing the priest did in the temple ritual. And so that's why after saying thank you, thank you, thank you, we do a little Columbo and we ask God for one more thing. You know, please grant us peace. Now, let me just say one last word about this and then we'll conclude. So it says, you bless your people, Israel, at every season with all time with peace. Baruch atah Adonai, who blesses your people, Israel, with peace. So why, and we're very ethnocentric here, right? Asking God for peace for Israel. What about the rest of the planet? We're just this tiny little speck, right? Well, certainly in our tradition, one of the, and it's been our experience, sadly, for centuries, that we are the canary in the coal mine. And if there's, going to be a scapegoat, we're usually the first to be scapegoated. And if there's going to be unrest, we're the first that's going to feel it. So the idea that we're praying for peace is the idea is, well, if there's peace with Israel, that's a sign that there's going to be peace everywhere. I think that that's kind of implied in the prayer. And in the last sentence of the Kaddish prayer, Osei Shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, right? So peace should come for us and for all of Israel, v'imru amen, right? Again, the idea is if there's peace in Israel, there's peace for everybody. But I think that some people have now changed the language of that last line to say v'al kol yoshvei tevel, which means that on all the inhabitants of the world. So we make explicit what was maybe implicit, that peace for Israel means peace for everybody. And absolutely, when I pray that last blessing of the Amidah, even if I don't add V'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, I definitely have, it's not just peace for us, it's peace for everybody we're praying for. And I certainly think that's important for us to keep in mind. It's not all about us, it's about humanity. We want humanity to be at peace. And that's the greatest blessing of all. You know, what the economists call a peace dividend. If we don't have to spend such a huge percentage of our GDP on weapons, imagine what we could do if we spent it instead on healthcare, on food care, on taking care of the needy, taking care of those who are less fortunate. Scientific advancement, that's the peace dividend. Peace would be a tremendous boon to humanity. We would stop fighting with each other and be more and the idea that we'd all cooperate more. We could imagine what humanity could do if we were all cooperating together. So peace has to start, and from peace comes all these other bounties for humanity and for the world. And that's why it's so important, and that's why we end our prayers with a prayer for peace. Okay, any last thoughts about the Amidah? Yes.
What happened to the fourth blessing?
Oh, because there's 7 blessings for Shabbat, you mean?
We did 1, 2, 3. And
Yeah.
then to 5. What happened
Oh,
to
5,
number 4?
yeah, we did 5, 6, 7. Right. Okay, so what happened to 4? Okay, so on Shabbat and festivals, we take out all those petitions. Remember I said we were going to ask God for a bunch of things? Mm-hmm. So there's 13 things we ask God for during the week. And on Shabbat and festivals, we're not supposed to work. God's not supposed to work. And maybe more importantly, we're not supposed to be worried about mundane things. We're trying to be holy on Shabbat and festival. We're trying to be holy people, not thinking about worldly things, thinking about spiritual things. So we take those worldly things out of the Amidah, and instead we stick one blessing in the middle, which says this is a holy day. And so on Shabbat and festivals, it's called the Kedushat Hayom, the holiness of the day blessing. And it varies a little bit depending on what day the blessing is for. And on Shabbat, it varies whether it's evening, morning, Musaf, or afternoon. Okay. For each of the Shabbat Amidahs, it's slightly different. But it basically says this day is a holy day and we're resting.
Rabbi, I have to run. Thank you very much.
Okay, sure, you're welcome. Any other questions? So next week, I'm going to start the unorthodox Judaism. I started teaching this at Melton several years ago. So if you took the Melton class, you know, it's basically going to be pretty similar to that one. I'm going to use sources like I always do. So I'm going to bring in traditional sources, modern sources, and talk about questions that modern people ask. You know, did God really talk to prophets? Did they hear voices? Did they see visions? Or was there something else going on? Who wrote the Bible? Who wrote the 5 books of Moses? Did all those miracles really happen? And if God intervenes in science, you know, how do we have a scientific world? Why do bad things happen to good people? What happens in the afterlife? All those questions I'm going to be addressing, and it'll be about 8 sessions starting next week.
Wonderful.
So I hope you all come back and we'll have a good time with that. Oh, and that's going to be at 9 o'clock, not this hour. 9 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry. Is
That's
that too
right.
early?
I think they're having Aaron Howard at 10:30, aren't they?
Yes, Aaron Howard's going to do the history of Jews in Russia at 10:30, so I'm going to do 9 to 10, and then he's going to do a second hour.
Okay.
oh, 9. Okay, thank you. Good.
Yeah, 9
Yeah,
o'clock.
yeah, that was in the announcement.
Right,
Oh.
right. Okay,
Okay, can I ask one more question? Has
Sure.
nothing to do with this. What is going on with the possible reopening of the shul?
okay. So this Shabbat, we started bringing back just a minyan, only
Right.
10 people. Jared, our president, has selected which lay people are going to show up. He's trying to get younger people so that we don't have people who are more at risk, because I guess the virus unfortunately attacks people my age, but and older. So younger people, hopefully, and we're spreading out in the Friedman Levitt. So there's social distancing. Everybody's wearing facial coverings. We're trying to be as careful as we can about it, and still have a minyan so that we can do Kaddish, we can do the Kedusha, we can do Torah reading. That's only for Friday night and Saturday morning. My guess is that in the next few weeks, I'm not sure when, we may start doing a daily minyan. Same idea, it would be in Friedman Levitt, not in the chapel, so that the 10 and only 10 people would be spread out in the Friedman Levitt, so that we would have a minyan there, and then people can zoom in so they can say Kaddish. That's going to be the next step, and I'm guessing that would be in a few weeks, I'm thinking, unless, we'll have to see how things go. As for everybody coming back, I don't know. I can tell you that I was in a Zoom conference with a bunch of colleagues around the country, and the strong suggestion we're getting from pretty much everybody is,
Not to do it.
yeah, to plan that even the high holidays are going to be probably, well, here's the thing. The high holidays is when everybody's going to want to be there. And you're going to have, hundreds of people from Beth Yeshurun. There'd be,
Thousands.
yeah, people coming in a very confined space for a long period of time. Even with facial coverings, it's not a good idea. It doesn't seem like. And if you say to people, and if you have to sit 6 feet apart, how would you do that?
Need a new shul.
Yeah, and how would you keep it in the hallways? And if you want to limit it to say, okay, we'll only have half the people, or we'll do, how do you decide who comes when? The logistics of it, thinking it through, are going to be very difficult. Fortunately, I guess in a way, our Christian friends really had to do this for us already, because their big day is Easter, and almost every single church did a distant program for Easter. And I'm talking to some of my Christian friends to see how that went. And of course, our colleagues are, and at Beth Yeshurun, we're trying to figure out ways that we might be able to do this in a meaningful way. But just brace yourself, because that is, I think, a good likelihood that that's probably how we're going to have to do it this year, and it's going to be strange. Maybe we'll have a vaccine, but that doesn't seem too likely by then.
No, it's not going to be that quickly.
No, not that good.
No.
So, particularly for the high holidays, it's going to be tough.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Rabbi. I learned a lot today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It was quite enlightening.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Thank you.
Okay, I'll see you 9 o'clock next week.
9 o'clock. We'll be there.
9 o'clock. Okay,
nice.
bye-bye.
All right.
All right. Take care. Have a good week, everybody.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.